Thank you. Thank you for coming to my talk today. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about the accessibility mindset. I'm also, as I do my talk, I'm going to be verbally explaining the photographs on the screen. This is for any visually impaired folks, either here in the audience or joining us on Zoom. Today, I'll also be reading all of the text on the slides. And at the moment, I'm going to describe what I look like. I'm a white guy. I am bald. I'm wearing a purple shirt and a pair of glasses. And I am standing in front of a light brown wall, and there's a beige door behind me. A little bit about my own disability background. I've stuttered since I was a little kid. It's changed as I've gotten older. It was fairly severe when I was young. It's not quite as severe now. It tends to go away when I do public speaking, which is one of the reasons why I love public speaking. But that is one of the things that I'm bringing to my experience and also to this talk. The other aspect of my own disability experience is about 4 years ago, I was in a pretty serious bike accident. I was making a left-hand turn. I was hit from behind by a car, and I was wearing a helmet, but I still received a traumatic brain injury. So I have seizures and some cognitive issues, which now relate specifically to how I work with the web. But it's the speech one we're going to talk about a little bit first. Okay, stick with the keyboard. Don't stick with the keyboard. All right, cool. All right, some of you might recognize this. Some of you may have even used one of these before. This is a telephone. This is a this is a picture of a red telephone. It's a classic telephone. It's got a receiver with a cord, and it's even got a dial. It does not have buttons. If you are my age or older, and I'm about 51, when you see that dial, you can probably can you feel that click as you turn? Yeah, I see the, yeah. So that's the kind of phone that this is. And you used to have to dial. You used to actually have to dial every single number and wait for it to click back. So we all have phones in our pockets now, but this is how phones used to be. Couldn't really move around. If you were really lucky as a kid, you got to have a phone in your own room. Maybe it had a real long cord and you could the phone was anywhere and you could go anywhere in the room with a cord, and that was pretty awesome. But I'm going to ask a very simple question about this phone, which is, and I'm going to make that go away because that's going to get in the way of my text. Oh, no. Okay, that's not working. All right, well, we'll do the best we can. So the question I'm going to ask about this phone is, who is this made for? And there's a lot of potential answers to this question. And the first and most likely answer is, this is made for people who want to talk to somebody who also has a phone, who is not physically present, who is far away in a different room. But this is made for people who want to communicate with people who are not present. But I'm going to dive in a little deeper on this particular question and ask another question about this phone, which is, who is able to use this? And this puts this phone into a really different light. And we still have the same picture of the phone here, but now we have some indicators, which I'm going to read out. This phone has an earpiece. You hold it up to your ear so you can hear the person on the other end, which means this is made for people who can hear. There's also a mouthpiece, which means you're going to speak into it. You're going to speak to the person who's on the other end of the phone, which means it's for people who can speak. It has a grip that you pick up the receiver with, which means it's for people who have the dexterity to use their hands and fingers, or have hands and fingers, period. And because of the way the dial is made, it's for people who can see. So we can say, who is this for? This is for people who want to communicate by phone, for people who are not present in the room who also have a phone. But really, when you dive into how the technology was made, we see all of these other things, that it's really not for everybody. It's really for certain people who have certain abilities, and people who don't have those abilities are not able to use this technology, which may have been intended for everyone. Now, for me personally, as a kid and then as a young professional, the big issue was the mouthpiece, because one of the things I have a lot of trouble with as a stutterer, quite mysteriously, and this happens to a lot of people who stutter, and it's kind of like a cosmic joke, is I have trouble saying my name. When I'm being introduced to people, people say, hi, I'm whatever, and I have a lot of little tricks to do this, but if I'm just going to say Jesse, that becomes very difficult. And if you add on the phone, it becomes nearly impossible for me to do that. So one of my first jobs out of college, I worked in a bookstore. I love books, and I had all kinds of romantic notions about what working in a bookstore would be like. But when the phone rang, it was my job to answer it. The store was called Bookland, and I was supposed to say, Bookland downtown, this is Jesse. And I can do that now because I'm standing in front of y'all. But I couldn't really do that. And there was no conversation about, are you comfortable to pick up the phone? Are you able to say your name? Because who's gonna ask me that? No one's going to ask me that. There's this assumption that as a retail employee who is visibly able-bodied, that I'm going to be able to pick up the phone and say my name on it and then talk it all, because saying my name is only the first part. The thing about the telephone is if I wasn't physically present, I didn't have body cues and couldn't get that in-person vibe, talking really became nearly impossible. But it was an assumption that I was going to be able to do it because phones are for everybody, right? But for me, phones looked more like this. So this is a drawn representation of what is probably a medieval torture device. It is a chair with spikes on it. There's things to hold your hands to the armrests. There's some kind of device that's meant to torture your ankles. They look like propellers. I don't know what kind of torture that is exactly. And then there's another roller. But when the phone rang, it was my turn to answer it. This is what a telephone looked like to me. So the telephone as a piece of technology that it was developed, to me, that was not for everybody. This was not for me to use. Texting is like the best. I love texting. You're not required to answer a text right away. You can read it, which is fine for me because I'm not visually impaired, but like changing technology has really changed these things, and not having to use a phone all the time is a blessing. So let's take a look now at another piece of technology that I'm sure everybody here is totally familiar with, which is the computer. And this is a picture of a desktop computer. There is a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse. And we can ask this very same question about this piece of technology. Who is this made for? And then we can do the same thing that we did with the phone, which is there's a screen. The screen is for people who can see, perceive color for the most part, and also read. The keyboard and the mouse are for people who can use their hands and their fingers. So we do talk about how the internet has brought people together. It's unprecedented in the history of humanity. Anything new is unprecedented in the history of humanity, but whatever. And we can talk about how it's changed lives. But once again, when we parse our way through who is able to use this, we find all of a sudden that the computer, maybe it's not made for everyone. There's a bunch of assumptions built in about who is physically going to be able to use this thing. Actually, something I didn't map onto here on the screen, which I often think about, is generally speaking, a computer, and especially the web these days, are for people with a high level of cognitive processing ability, especially, and I don't understand why this is, newspaper websites and restaurant websites. You ever look at those? And there's non-consensual video and music playing that you didn't ask to play, and video scrolling that you didn't ask to scroll. If you have cognitive issues, and that's a broad category, I realize, those websites become extremely difficult to use. So that's another aspect of computer use that didn't necessarily get folded into the development of the technology. For computers, and for a lot of other things, but I'm going to specifically talk about the computer right now, we have assistive technology. And there are 4 pictures on this screen. I'm going to move around in a clockwise direction from the top left. In the top left, we have a picture of a pair of fingers on a Braille reader. This is an incredible thing to me. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but a Braille reader plugs into the computer, and it will go through the screen line by line, and the Braille characters will change. It's very tiny holes with pins that come up, and the Braille characters will change based on which line you're on. And someone who's able to read Braille, which is only about 30% of blind people, by the way, people who can read Braille will put their fingers on that Braille reader and read it. This is the only way that deaf blind people are able to interact with a keyboard, with a computer at all, by the way, with a Braille reader. That is a Braille reader on the left. That's one piece of assistive technology. Top right, we have a single-handed keyboard. This is an entire keyboard built to be used by one hand. I reckon, I'm not a single-handed keyboard user, so I don't know, but I reckon that's a right-handed keyboard. They're made for the left also. So if you have limited dexterity, are unable to use both your hands or arms, this is the assistive technology for that. Moving down to the bottom right, and I keep on switching these two, and I'm going to try to get this right. On the bottom right, we have a picture of a woman using a computer. There is no keyboard and there is no mouse. This person is sitting in a special chair that allows for eye tracking technology on the screen, tracking eye movements. And the person who is using a computer using eye movements is essentially using a mouse, but the mouse is tracking your eye. And clicks can be accomplished in any number of ways by blink patterns and stuff like that. And then continuing on to the bottom left, we have another person sitting at a computer. This one does have a keyboard, but this computer is using voice commands. And voice commands are like activating keyboard commands, which a lot of us do through the course of our day, but the keyboard commands are operated by the voice. So these are the kinds of assistive technologies that are used by computer users. But what I'm going to do right now is I am going to broaden the term assistive technology, because the way I'm using it right now is to say, here are devices that people who are disabled can use to operate a computer. However, lots of folks in the room here are wearing glasses. I am wearing glasses. If I'm wearing glasses, I can't read street signs while I'm driving. I can do pretty well without them, but if I'm driving without my glasses, I can't read street signs and I don't know where to turn exactly. And I have bifocals, so if I'm not wearing them, then I have to do this with a book. So any of y'all who are wearing glasses or contacts, you are using assistive technology. You are using a device that is helping you perform a day-to-day activity that you would not otherwise be able to do or have a lot of trouble doing. And if your vision is particularly impaired and you take off your glasses and you can't see anything and you're legally blind, then the glasses are really helping you perform all of your life tasks. But when I say assistive technology, we're usually thinking about, sorry if I'm stepping away from the mic, we're usually thinking about this stuff. We're not thinking about this, but glasses are assistive technology, and there are many other things that we all use day to day to help us to do day-to-day tasks that we would not be able to do if we didn't have those things. And that is assistive technology. It is a broad term because we want technology to be able to be used by everybody, and assistive technology gets it so everybody can do the things that we want to be able to do. So when we ask this question of any technology, we're talking mostly about computers right now, but when we ask the question about any technology, we ask, who is this made for? The correct answer is and should always be everyone. This thing, this technology that we create, the apps we write, the websites we build, if you work on hardware, the answer should always be, this is for everyone. And that's, that's kind of it can be a sort of a dreamy idea. There's a lot of steps between where your technology is at now and making it for everyone. So it's a little abstract and it's a little lofty, but at any given time, about 15% of the population, the human population of the world, has a disability of some kind. There's been a lot of studies on this conducted by different countries and different groups. So different studies have come up. Some studies have come up with as high as 30%. Some have come up with as low as 10%. Methodologies are different. When they're done in different countries, the definition of a disability might be different, which is why we get all these crazy different numbers. But we kind of put all those together and we average out, we say about 15%. So if you aren't designing your stuff for everybody, then you're leaving out 15% of the population. Now, on top of that, 80% of us will experience a disability at some point in our lifetime, mostly due to aging, because as we get older, we experience vision impairments, there's cognitive impairments, there's mobility, and there's hearing loss. That is disability. All of us are going to experience that. 80% of us are going to experience that at some point. The other thing is, the day before my accident, I didn't have cognitive issues, and the day after my accident, I did. So I don't mean to, I'm not trying to frighten you and say you get hit by a truck coming out here and you've joined the club. I'm not trying to freak you out. But what I am trying to say is the disability category is flexible. You can be temporarily disabled. I had surgery on my hand a ways back. And then for about 2 months, I had a cast on my hand. I couldn't use it. I started activating the voice activated stuff on my computer so I could do my job. A few months later, I took it off, I could get back. The category of disabled is a flexible category, and people can move in and out of it, and you can find yourself in it when you weren't necessarily in it before. So when I say everyone, I really mean everyone. When you design your technology, when you build your apps, when you create your websites, you're not just creating it for that abstract 15% of people who maybe people with a disability or who identify as such, and maybe you don't. You're designing for people you're designing for people in the future who may not be disabled now. You're designing for your family. You're designing for the older members of your family. And I mean family in the broadest term possible, not just your biological family. You're designing for the people you love now or in the future, and you're designing for yourself. Too, the cognitive issues that I take into account now, I only took into account in the abstract before. Now I know right away when a site's not clearing the bar. So now I'm designing for me, which is great. But the important thing is that that includes everybody you know. It includes everybody you know. So the way we use and create technology is informed by our life experience. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it's informed by our economic background, by our sexual identity, our racial and or ethnic background, our level of ability or disability, where we grew up and where we live, and individual life experiences. These things all converge to create not just who we are, but how we think. And it becomes the framework that we move through our day with, and then the framework that we create and build technology with, whether you realize it or not. And a lot of us have, worked at institutions where we've taken implicit bias training. All of those things are to kind of pull out all those unconscious frameworks that we carry around. This is the work that we need to do in order to create fully inclusive technology. We need to identify these things in ourselves and think about how these inform the job that we do every day, how we write code, who we are imagining is using our applications. These all inform all of that. So in order to create technology that is truly for everyone, we need to step outside our own mental frameworks. And I'm going to talk specifically about how to do that for the web. But before I do, I'm going to give you a few examples of what happens when you do not do this. This is a screenshot of the landing page for an article on Medium. The headline is "Bad Form Design. First name must be at least 4 characters." So a lot of us have built forms or used forms. We've applied security measures to those forms, maybe requiring that a phone number follows a certain pattern. Sometimes people have required a form where the name has to be a minimum of 4 characters. This is not a security standard that I'm familiar with, and I've built my share of forms, but I do know that they are out there. That knocks out anybody whose name is shorter than 4 characters. That also knocks out entire classes of people, because Asian people whose names have been transliterated into English, because this form probably doesn't support most Asian languages in the first place, a lot of Asian names, when they are transliterated into English, are very short, and those people cannot accurately complete this form. That becomes a barrier. That person will navigate away from this, not complete this. What is being offered here is not available to them. This is a landing page of an article from Mother Jones. The headline says, "Hey Siri, why don't you understand more people like me?" I don't know people who have worked on Siri. I'm sure there's a broad range of people who have worked on Siri. Given who has created Siri, I'm willing to roll the dice and say that most of the folks are white. And a lot of folks are not American, but I'm willing to say or bet or guess that most of them probably are American. Siri has trouble understanding non-American speakers. Siri has trouble understanding people from the American South who are English speakers, but are speaking with a Southern accent. That becomes a barrier. They are not able to use Siri without a certain level of frustration or a whole bunch of pain points, as we say in the UX business. That's a barrier. And if you are someone with a disability who uses your phone to access services and you need to use your voice and you have an accent that Siri doesn't get, that's a problem. This is the third and last example I'll give. This is a landing page from Scientific American. The headline says, police facial recognition technology can't tell Black people apart. So I've kind of ordered these from least social impact to highest social impact. You can imagine and have read in the news what this kind of thing leads to when this kind of technology is used for policing. When people create technology and do not assess the assumptions that they are using to create the technology, it's not just inconvenient for people, it has social consequence. So I'm not just saying it's good to design your stuff for full accessibility because it's a nice thing to do. It is a nice thing to do. I'm not saying design your stuff fully accessible because it helps people out and is more inclusive. That's true, and that's also good. I'm telling you to do it because it has social consequence for people and has social consequences that you may not be able to predict. So what I'm telling you to do by assessing the framework that you're walking around in the world with is super important, and in some circumstances can mean life or death for people. So since I'm going to talk about accessibility for the web, we have a super handy thing in the web development world that will naturally help us assess these assumptions and naturally help us step outside them. I may be telling you something you already know, but if this is new to you, great. If it's not, then you're going to get a quick refresher. We have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. I'll take a quick swing here. Thank you. And this little quote I pulled is from the w3.org standard guidelines for WCAG. WCAG was developed through the W3C process in cooperation with individuals and organizations around the world with the goal of providing a single shared standard for web content accessibility that meets the needs of individuals, organizations, and governments internationally. And this is an evolving thing, but this is the intention behind WCAG. WCAG is a set of 4 overarching principles, a set of guidelines for adhering to the principles, testable criteria for meeting the guidelines, and techniques for meeting the guidelines. And I'm not going to dive all the way into WCAG. We could spend like an entire conference talking about WCAG. But on the highest level, the guidelines, the web content accessibility guidelines are that all web content should be perceivable by everyone. All functionality should be operable by everyone. All content should be understandable by everyone. And all content and functionality should be robust. Robust means it should work across all browsers, operating systems, any environment that the application or site is working in, it should work. It should work everywhere. It should be perceivable, operable, and understandable across the board. So we can treat the WCAG guidelines as a set of boxes to be checked. You could work on your application or your website and go through the WCAG guidelines, check them off, make sure you're meeting everything you need to meet AA, single A, AA, or AAA if you're totally awesome. And you can do that and your site will be accessible, and that's great. But we can also use it to change the way we think. And that's what I'm going to ask people to do, to not just say, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, but to look at the guidelines and say, oh, I'm being asked to build my application this way so that someone using a screen reader can use it. I'm not visually impaired, but I don't know how people might use a screen reader. That's a hypothetical. I actually do know how to use a screen reader, but you can treat the WCAG guidelines that way. The reason this hearing, the reason we have rules around captions and around how sound gets used is for hearing impaired people. I'm not hearing impaired, but if I look at these guidelines, I can start to imagine what is being asked of me and how a hearing impaired person might want to access what I'm offering. So this is the better way to use WCAG. I think if you're just going through it to make sure you meet the guidelines, I'm not going to argue with you. That's really like, it's what everyone ought to be doing, and it's great. And we could end up with an accessible world that way. But I think people should take that extra step and ask that next set of questions. Why are these guidelines the way they are? Why am I being asked to build it this way? What does this goal meet? What need is it trying to meet? What is it trying to do that I don't necessarily relate to as a human who moves through the world, but someone else needs? What is it asking of me? And that's why WCAG is so great, I think. So I'm going to shift to a more specific instance from my professional life. I work for the UC Berkeley Library right here. I'm the web designer and a web developer for the library. I was one of 2 web developers. My colleague retired. We are down to 1. It's me. So this is the UC Berkeley Library mission statement. You can find this on our website. We help current and future users find, evaluate, use, and create knowledge to better the world. So who is the library for? Who is the library website for? The library is for current and future users who want to find, evaluate, use, and create knowledge to better the world. It's also for everybody. The library website is for everybody. I, as a developer and a designer on the website, want everybody to be able to use it. This is our target audience. Of course, people want to use the website, but I want to be available for everyone because I don't know who's going to be in this group. So I'm going to focus in on our navigation menu. This is the navigation menu before our rebuild and redesign. We rebuilt and redesigned our site over the last previous couple of years. We launched it in May 2022. This is the old navigation menu. And there's a few accessibility problems with this that I'm gonna go over super quick. Can people hear me if I move away from this mic? Okay, cool. I'm wondering about people on Zoom too, because I'm thinking of everybody. So this navigation menu is a hover menu. Hover menus are evil. Do not use them. Hover menus are evil. One of the reasons they are evil in this case is under the libraries menu, at the time that this site existed, there were 35 libraries and services. So when you hovered over that and that libraries menu popped up, it was a big box. It went from like here to here, and there was 3 columns, and it blocked everything else on the page, including the search bar, which is what most people were there for. So hovering. Hovering is no good. It requires a mouse. It requires a mouse and also creates what we call hover tunnels. Everyone is familiar with. You roll over that hover menu, that thing opens up. Thank you, I appreciate that. You hover over the menu, the box drops down, you try to get to the thing, you moved off the hover menu, poof, and then you have to go back, and then it happens again. It's hovered, and that requires a mouse, but it also requires the manual dexterity to navigate those hover tunnels. I do use a mouse. I cannot stand hover tunnels. So the hovering issue was one major issue. I got a big list of them, but I'm only going to do a couple of them. One of the other issues is the contrast here between this blue and this gray. It's not, it doesn't fail the contrast test, but it gets awful close. So people who are colorblind or just generally visually impaired may have a hard time distinguishing this text from the background. So it fails there as well. Lastly, because it's a hover menu, because all of these sections, the libraries menu was the biggest one with the 35 links on it, but all of these had lots of stuff. For someone with a low cognitive threshold, hover menus that keep popping up that have tons of links, those are exhausting. You all have heard of like spoons, like I've only got 3 spoons today, right? This takes up like 5 spoons if you have cognitive issues trying to navigate all this. So these are some of the issues that we were trying to address. So when we ask, who is this menu for? This menu is for non-visually impaired mouse users with a high cognitive threshold. Nobody intended to do that, but when you look at how the menu actually works, this is who you end up with. That's probably a lot of people, but it's not everybody. It's not everybody. So why is the navigation menu built that way then? How did this happen? And it's really pretty simple, because the designers and developers were not visually impaired, were able to use a mouse, and inherited a navigational architecture that reflected the organization. Now, my former colleague who retired, he built this menu, and I checked out with him, like, do you mind if I just like smack this menu? And he was like, go ahead. I'm retiring. It's all good. So I did. I'm smacking this menu. So the developers were not visually impaired, so they were not inclined to ask how would a screen reader use this menu. They were able to use a mouse, so we ended up with hover menus with lots of links, because those could be navigated that way rather than with just a keyboard, which is what you want everything on your website to be able to do, but especially a nav menu. And what I mean by inherited a navigational architecture that reflected the organization, if you don't engage in some kind of user testing, if you don't do something that looks outside the organization for how people are actually wanting to navigate your site will default to a navigational structure that reflects the structure of your organization. So that menu, that library menu, looks like structurally the library, because they hadn't gone through that process. So so let me get to that. Right. So who do we want to be able to use the navigation menu? We want everyone to be able to use it. Specifically, we want keyboard users to be able to use it. We want screen reader users to be able to use it, people with low vision, and people with cognitive disabilities. We want to get to the groups that the previous menu was failing, and everybody else. So how did we do that? Well, we used an outside vendor for site architecture and visual design, and we asked them these questions. What is your agency's overall approach to web accessibility? And if you ask a vendor that, and they say, everything we build is 100% accessible, do not work with them. It's never true. No, there's 100% accessibility is not a thing. I could build the most perfectly accessible site, and the day we launched the library website, it was awesome. Then the content people started doing their thing, and a couple images didn't have alt tags. Not 100% accessible anymore. So if you have a vendor who says that, no, that's done. Get on to the next RFP. So then you ask them, are you familiar with WCAG? The answer to that needs to be yes. If they are not, on to the next RFP. And then, of course, can you provide us examples of your work that meet WCAG guidelines? And they should be able to do this too, and they should be able to do it confidently. So the vendor we ended up using was able to answer all these questions the way that we wanted them to. Our developers adopted the accessibility mindset by focusing on simplifying the structure of the navigation menu, using a high contrast color scheme, working to find straightforward, easy to understand link names. That's the cognitive stuff right there. Short, easy to understand text. And avoiding unnecessary visual design elements. Visual design, I'm a designer. Visual design is super important. We want our sites to be pretty, but the unnecessary stuff clouds what you want your users to get. So if you are going to use design elements that aren't performing a function of some kind, make sure they're getting vetted by people with disabilities, so that people who are going to find a website pretty will find it pretty, but they're not getting in anybody's way. And we adopted the accessibility mindset. Our developers adopted the accessibility mindset by ensuring that the navigation menu can be used with only a keyboard. People should be able to tab through it and use the down arrows where appropriate and not have to mouse. By using screen reader accessible markup, again, that's like a whole other conference. I'm not going to dive into that right now, but there are appropriate ways to write markup for accessibility and ways to not. By making the navigation menu responsive to varying screen widths, i.e. mobile responsive, that's kind of out of the box these days. Everybody expects their website to be mobile responsive, but there are accessibility angles to that too. People with low vision will zoom in the website on their desktop. And if your site is fully mobile responsive, it will still work once they have zoomed in, and the menus will still operate. So it's not just about laptop or desktop versus phone. It's about visually impaired people being able to zoom and have the website still operate. And the developers adhered to the style guidelines as provided by the vendor. The vendor provided us with a set of accessible style guidelines. We made sure those translated through the development process to the final site. And then user testing, we adopted the accessibility mindset during testing by using automated tools like Site Improve. Lots of people learning about Site Improve here. We use that here. Site Improve is great. Browser plugins, Site Improve has a browser plugin. I like a few other ones. Manually testing with only a keyboard, which I encourage you all to do. Push the mouse away or unplug it and throw it across the room and just use the keyboard. And most importantly, asking people with disabilities to help us test. I can catch a few things, but I'm not visually impaired and I'm not hearing impaired. So we have people in the library who have disabilities. We have an office of people who can help us test for disabilities. There are also disability user testing services who will specifically test your application or site with people who have the disabilities that you want to test for, or really all of them. And I encourage you, if you don't know people who can help test your stuff with disabilities, those outside services really should be used. So this is where we ended up. I have two views of the library, the new library navigation menu here. The top is the regular menu, the bottom is expanded. Very, very few links, very simple language, high contrast, and then these are all openable by a keyboard and also closable by a keyboard. Also closable in an intuitive way. If this is expanded and you click over here, this goes away. So, or click or hit the return key even. So our menu is now accessible in a way that the previous one was not. And the drop-down menus are limited to 5 links. It's always good to have a link limit and then enforce that as best you can, because otherwise people are going to say, I want this link in that menu. I want this link in that menu. And then before you know it, you have our 35 link library menu again. So this is where we ended up. I'm immensely pleased with this for the high contrast, for the more clean look. I love these drop downs, and I like just to click through it with a keyboard to see my work. It makes me happy. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but the most actively used thing on the homepage for the library is the search bar. This is our old search bar. We have the same contrast problems. A lot of this is handled by JavaScript and recognized mouse clicks, but not keyboard clicks. This form had a bunch of JavaScript running behind it. It wasn't using the native HTML elements that forms are built with. So it was throwing a bunch of extra stuff at it that was interfering with screen readers and keyboards. The new search bar uses a regular form. There's nothing fancy going on here. This drop-down menu is accessible by keyboard. The search is accessible by keyboard. It's accessible to screen readers. The communications office, which are our design folks, didn't want labels above the form because they want it to look clean, but the labels are still available to screen readers. So someone moving through this form with a screen reader knows that this is a search text field. This is the kind of search you want to do. And here's the search button. All of that stuff is available to screen readers where visual users can still tell what's going on, and the design goals from the communications office were still achieved. Getting near the end here. Okay, cool. There are very practical reasons for adopting an accessibility mindset. Of course, I want everyone in the world to do that because it is the right thing to do, because it is the moral and correct thing to do. But some of us are working in cultures where maybe that's not necessarily supported. Here at UC Berkeley, I don't know how many of y'all are aware of this, but in December of 2022, we entered into a consent decree with the Justice Department because many of our public-facing services were not accessible, and the Justice Department got involved. And the consent decree requires us to hit certain milestones within a certain period of time. So we are looking at this very practically right now. But there are very practical reasons. The first one being retrofitting for accessibility. Retrofitting takes more time and costs more money than starting it from the ground up. Of course, you may be working on sites and applications that have been around for a long time, so you have to retrofit it. But if you are starting a new project, you start with accessibility now, and it will save you time and money moving forward. Secondly, about the retroactive part, retroactive fixes are difficult to maintain over the long term and increase in applications fragility. So if you are retrofitting a site, thank you, for accessibility, then you're tacking on code that needs to be maintained, and that makes it more likely that things are going to break. And lastly, this is the big motivator. If you can't get the culture to change, you are less likely to be sued. You are less likely to be sued if your site is fully accessible. And if you get handed a consent decree or enter into a consent decree, the milestones you'll be required to make will be in an extremely tight time frame that will be extremely hard for you to meet. It's usually you have an 18-month period to get all of your sites fully accessible. And that's a rough expectation to meet. So if you're having to push accessibility up the ladder, feel free to float that one out. We're under capitalism, money is the motivator. Say, I don't want us to get sued. Let's get accessibility in on the ground level now. So we can ask this question about who is this for, who is able to use it, about all the technology in our lives. And because we only have about 5 minutes left, I want to get some questions in. I'm just going to roll through these pictures quick. Clockwise again, top left, we have the iPhone. Almost everyone is able to use the iPhone. Great accessibility features on there. A movie theater, you can step into a movie theater and ask yourself that question, who's able to use this? There are spaces for wheelchairs in this one. Can't use the stairs, that's all right. There's wheelchair space here. This is the train from the Bay Area Rapid Transit System. We have newer trains now, but you can ask that question about BART as well. Who's able to use this? Newer trains are easier to use than the older ones. And then ATMs. ATMs are one of the most accessible public technologies in our cultures because banks have been sued left and right because everyone needs to get their money. And ATMs have a lot of accessibility features. So I don't know how many of us go to ATMs anymore. I haven't been to one in a long time, but the next time you happen to see one, walk up and you'll see a place to plug in a listening device. You'll see a Braille in lots of places. You'll see lots of raised features. So fingers can tell where things are, and a wheelchair will be able to sidle up to it, and everything will be at a height that a wheelchair can get to. So ATMs, of course, all the banks had to be sued to accomplish that, but we got where we wanted to get to. That's my talk. I'm happy. Oh, thank you. Well, we have like 3 minutes. Okay, sure.
Regarding the near miss, how do you monitor a US QCD when a company is bought out by another company?
That is an excellent question. And the most honest answer is I don't know because I've never been involved with that. But the likely answer is it's probably similar to how we vet third-party vendors, which is all the vendors have, the security, privacy, accessibility steps they have to go through. And if something's getting spun off into a third party, that's what I would want to see. I'd want to say, okay, they're separate now. They need to be re-vetted. But I've never experienced that directly myself, so I can't comment from experience.
I think from Scott Silva, in terms of accessibility, do you have any efforts for non-web-based applications? Also, do you put much effort into fulfilling Title I of the ADA? You've got your Title II and 3 obligations.
I'm going to answer the first question first, which is about non-web-based applications. I do work on them because I'm the web guy. I'm usually getting called in by IT to vet something that's already been built, which is too late. It's too late. You got to call me in at the beginning, but since I'm not often getting called in at the beginning, I'm usually looking at work that's already done. So the low-hanging fruit is color contrast. Color contrast should always clear that bar. I won't dive into what the WCAG guidelines are now. And if it's meant to be used primarily on a desktop computer, make sure you can do everything without a mouse. And then get someone who knows how to use a screen reader and move through it. That's like the big three. So the sections of the ADA that I'm most familiar, okay. The section of the ADA that I'm most familiar with is section 508. I can't speak directly to Title I and Title II, or maybe I can and I just don't know the details. So I'm going to have to take a pass on that one for now, especially since we only have 1 minute left. I'm sorry. Any other questions? Anybody in the room? Anything else on Zoom? All right. Thank you, everybody. Start the revolution.